The hush of the crowded hall pressed down on her like a weight she could hardly bear. Beneath the heavy embroidered veil, her breath came shallow, uneven, as though the delicate lace itself were stealing the air from her lungs. She clasped her trembling hands together, nails digging into her palms to stop them from shaking. No one could see her face, but still she felt exposed, judged, on display for 100 eyes. This was her wedding day, a day meant for joy, for radiant smiles and laughter. Yet behind her veil, silent tears slipped down her cheeks, hidden only because the fabric caught them before they could fall to the floor. She had dreamed once of being a bride when she was a child, before the harsh turns of life stole those innocent hopes. Back then, she had imagined walking down an aisle with light in her eyes and certainty in her heart. She had imagined love, but reality was different. Her heart twisted with shame. She had no beauty to boast of, at least not the kind she believed anyone would cherish. Too many nights she had whispered to herself that she was plain, unworthy, a shadow in a world that adored light. The scars she carried, some seen and some buried deep, had convinced her that no man could ever look at her and call her beautiful. And now here she stood, veiled not just in cloth, but in fear. The murmur of guests blended into a blur of sound around her. She dared not look up, dared not see the groom standing only a few steps away. Her husband-to-be. The man who would, in moments, reach for her veil and reveal her face to the world. Her stomach knotted painfully. What if he recoiled? What if his eyes betrayed disappointment? What if his silence shouted louder than words ever could? She felt her chest tighten, and her hands curled tighter around the delicate bouquet she held. The flowers were fresh, their fragrance sweet, but she could not smell them. All she could smell was fear. Her mind raced back through the days leading to this moment. The hurried arrangements, the family whispers, the weight of expectation that had pressed her into this union. She had told herself it was fate, that she had no choice but to surrender. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She was terrified of being seen. One slow breath, another. She willed her body not to tremble. Yet beneath the veil, her tears betrayed her again, seeping hot and silent. The priest's voice echoed somewhere at the edge of her hearing, the ceremony's words tumbling past her as if they were being spoken in another language. She could not focus. The world outside her veil seemed dim, distant, muffled. It was as though the veil were not just a piece of silk, but a wall she had built around herself for years, a wall that had kept her hidden, safe in her invisibility. Now, in one inevitable moment, that wall would be torn away. Her breath hitched. The silence in the hall deepened. A pause, a shifting, a sense that all eyes were waiting. She knew what came next. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in her ears. The footsteps beside her grew nearer. She could feel the presence of the man she was about to marry. Tall, steady, patient. His nearness sent another wave of panic through her. She dared not lift her chin. 1,000 doubts screamed inside her head. He doesn't know what he'll see. He doesn't know who I really am. He will regret this. He will turn away. She bit her lip hard, trying to hold back a sob. The salt of her tears touched her tongue. Her body wanted to run, to escape, to hide where no one could ever find her again. But her feet would not move. And then she felt it. The faint brush of his hand, stopping just short of the veil. Not rough, not hurried. Gentle, almost hesitant, as though he feared to break her. Her breath froze. Time itself seemed to hold still in that charged silence. Would this be the moment she had dreaded all her life? The unveiling of her shame, the moment the world saw her as she saw herself. Flawed, fragile, unworthy. Beneath the veil, another tear slid free. She lowered her gaze further, hoping desperately that somehow, by making herself small, invisible, she could delay what was to come. But nothing could stop it now. The weight of her veil felt heavier than ever. The weight of expectation, the weight of fear. And yet, beneath it all, a flicker of something else stirred, a fragile, impossible hope. That maybe, just maybe, when the veil was lifted, she would not see rejection in his eyes. That maybe she would see something she had never been given before. Acceptance, love. The hall was silent, yet to him, the silence was not heavy, it was alive. Every pair of eyes fixed on them, every breath of anticipation hanging in the air. And yet he saw only her. The bride, cloaked in white, head bowed beneath her veil, hands trembling as they gripped the fragile bouquet. She was still as stone. But he sensed her storm. Even through the barrier of lace and silk, he could feel her fear, her fragility, as though it pulsed from her in invisible waves. He should have reached for her veil already. That was the tradition, the expected step. One smooth gesture, a smile, the reveal. Guests were waiting. The priest, standing close, gave him a faint nod of encouragement. But he did not move, because he saw her hands quiver, because he saw her shoulders tense like a bird ready to take flight, because he caught the glimmer of moisture behind the veil, the quiet shine of tears she thought no one noticed. His chest tightened. She was crying. It was not the tears of joy brides were supposed to shed, but tears that carried weight, shame, fear. He had not expected that. And instead of annoyance or disappointment, something else filled him, protectiveness. She was hurting here in front of everyone. Yet no one else seemed to see it. He wanted to take away the weight pressing down on her. He wanted to step between her and the world, shield her from every whisper, every judging eye. He wanted her to know she was not alone. So instead of rushing, he slowed. He reached out. Not to her veil, not yet, but to her hands. Carefully, deliberately, he touched her trembling fingers. His skin brushed hers, warm and steady, grounding her. Her hands stiffened, startled by the contact, but he did not pull away. He let his thumb rest lightly against her knuckles, a silent promise, I see you. I am here. Through the thin silk of her gloves, he felt her pulse. Fast, frantic, a bird's wings beating in a cage. He pressed her hand just a little tighter, as though to tell her, breathe. You don't have to face this alone. She dared not lift her head, but he noticed the way her breath hitched, the way her shoulders softened by a fraction. It was small, but to him it was everything. Patience. That was what she needed, not force, not expectation. The priest cleared his throat softly, a hint of impatience threading through. The guests shifted in their seats, curious murmurs rippling at the delay. But he ignored them. Their world could wait. Because in this moment his world was her. He leaned just slightly closer, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for her ears. You don't have to be afraid. She stiffened again as though the words struck her heart. He could not see her eyes yet, but he could feel the tremor of her silence, the war raging inside her. I won't rush you, he murmured again. Take your time. The words were gentle but firm with sincerity. A promise. The bride's fingers curled tighter around his, and for a heartbeat, he wondered if she would pull away. But she didn't. She held on faintly, uncertainly, yet there. And for him, that fragile grip was more precious than the gold band waiting to be slipped onto her finger. The hall seemed to fall into a different kind of silence now. Not one of expectation, but of stillness, reverence. As though the quiet itself respected the tenderness unfolding between them. He lifted his other hand, slow and steady. His fingers hovered near the edge of her veil, but again, he did not rush. His palm lingered there, suspended, so she would know what was coming. So she would have the chance to breathe before the world saw her unveiled. He felt her body go rigid. Another tear traced its path down her cheek, shimmering faintly behind the lace. Trust me, he whispered softly, his voice breaking through her fortress of fear. The words weren't grand, not rehearsed, not dramatic, just 3 simple words. Yet they carried more weight than vows, more truth than ceremony. His patience was not weakness, it was strength. The kind of strength that did not demand but invited, that did not push but waited. In that moment, he wasn't a groom eager to claim his bride. He was a man offering her safety. And though she still trembled, though her tears still fell, he felt the smallest shift. the faintest tilt of her chin, as though she were daring to believe him. For the first time since the ceremony began, she was not shrinking away. She was slowly, barely leaning toward him. The guests, the priest, the hall itself, all faded into nothing. There was only the bride, veiled in her sorrow, and the groom, holding her hand as though it were the most fragile and most sacred thing in the world. And soon he would lift that veil, not to expose her, not to judge her, but to tell her with his eyes, with his voice, with his soul, "You're safe, you're enough, you're beautiful." The hall was so quiet. It felt as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath. He still held her trembling hands, steady and sure, as though his touch alone could anchor her against the storm raging inside. But now, the time had come. The veil had to be lifted. The world was waiting. Slowly, carefully, he let one hand slip free from hers, moving toward the delicate lace that hid her face. He hesitated for a heartbeat, not because of doubt, but because he wanted her to feel it, not as a duty, not as a tradition, but as a moment just for them. His fingers brushed the edge of the veil. She flinched ever so slightly, her shoulders tightening beneath the gown, her chin lowering further as if to hide. Her pulse beat wildly in her wrist, where his thumb still rested. He leaned just a little closer, his voice soft enough for her alone. "Look at me." The words were tender, not commanding. Yet they carried a quiet strength that asked, not demanded, for her trust. For a long second, she couldn't. The weight of years pressed on her, years of believing she was not enough, years of seeing only her flaws when she looked in the mirror, years of fearing rejection before it could come. But then, something in his voice broke through the walls she had built. Something in the warmth of his hand, the patience in his stillness, gave her the courage to lift her head, just slightly. Beneath the veil it was enough. With a slow, reverent motion he raised the fabric. The lace slid upward, light as air, yet to her it felt like the heaviest curtain being drawn back from her soul. Her breath caught. Her eyes fluttered shut against the sting of tears. She braced herself for the sharp sting of disappointment, the subtle flicker of rejection in his gaze, the silence that would feel like a knife. The veil slipped free. For the first time her face was revealed. Her lashes were damp, her cheeks streaked with tears. She looked fragile, vulnerable, like a porcelain doll about to shatter. Every flaw she believed she carried seemed written across her features in that moment, magnified by the fear that made her chest rise and fall too quickly. And then, silence. She dared not look, she couldn't. She waited, the dread curling through her stomach like smoke. A breath. Another. His silence stretched, until at last she forced herself to glance upward. And in his eyes she did not see what she expected. There was no hesitation, no flicker of regret, no coldness. Instead, his gaze softened instantly, his expression unraveling into something achingly tender. As though the sight of her, the real her, tear-streaked and trembling, was not a disappointment but a revelation. Her lips parted slightly, her breath trembling on the edge of breaking. She wanted to turn away, to hide again, but his eyes held her still. "You're," his voice cracked, faintly hushed with awe. "Beautiful?" The word hung in the air, not loud, not shouted, but carrying the weight of truth. Her throat tightened. For a moment she thought she had misheard, that her desperate heart had invented the sound. But no, his lips had spoken it. His eyes had confirmed it. His hand, still steady around hers, sealed it. Her vision blurred with fresh tears, though now they did not fall from shame, but from something entirely different. Something terrifying and wonderful all at once. How could he say that? How could he look at her, the girl who had spent her life believing she was unworthy, and see beauty? Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Only a soft, choked breath. He did not rush her, did not press her for words. Instead, he lifted his free hand, brushing a stray strand of damp hair from her cheek, his touch feather light. The warmth of his fingers lingered, as though he wanted her to know she was not a burden to touch, not something fragile to avoid. but someone he longed to hold. "Do you hear me?" he whispered, leaning close enough that only she could catch the vow in his voice. "You're beautiful. Exactly as you are." The words shattered the dam inside her. The walls she had built for years, the armor of shame and fear, cracked and fell away under the weight of his sincerity. For the first time, she believed, just for a flicker of a second, that maybe she wasn't what her fears had painted her to be. Maybe she could be seen, not hidden. Maybe she could be loved. The hall erupted in soft sighs and murmurs as guests witnessed the tender exchange, but she barely heard them. All she knew was his eyes, his words, his hand steady against hers, anchoring her in a storm she no longer faced alone. And in that moment, the veil wasn't just lifted from her face. It was lifted from her heart. The veil slipped from his fingers and settled against her shoulders, forgotten. What lingered was the silence, the kind of silence that did not feel heavy, but holy. A stillness that made the entire hall fade into the background, leaving only the two of them standing in the center of the world. Her breath trembled, her chest rising and falling as though she had just run a great distance. She searched his face desperately, still expecting to find disappointment hidden somewhere in his eyes. Yet all she saw was wonder. All she felt was warmth. Her lips parted, as if to protest, as if to say, "No, you don't see me clearly. I'm not what you think." But the words refused to come, because his gaze did not waver. In his eyes, there was no pity, no forced kindness, only truth. "You're beautiful," he whispered again, slower this time, as though engraving the words into her very soul. The tears came harder now. She shook her head faintly, overwhelmed, but he only smiled, the kind of smile that carried strength, the kind of smile that could hold someone up when they no longer knew how to stand. He reached forward, his hand brushing her cheek. The warmth of his skin against her flushed face broke her last defenses. She leaned ever so slightly into his touch, like a weary traveler finding rest. And in that tender surrender, the shame she had carried for years began to loosen its grip. For so long she had believed love was something distant, something fragile, something she would never be worthy of. But here now, in front of everyone, this man had undone that lie with 3 words. The guests shifted softly, a few smiles breaking out in the crowd. The priest cleared his throat again, ready to guide the ceremony forward. But neither bride nor groom moved. They were lost in each other. His thumb brushed away one of her tears, tender and unhurried. "No more hiding," he murmured, just for her. "Not with me." Her heart clenched. No more hiding. Could it be that simple? Could it be true? Her voice trembled when she finally found it. You mean it?" He nodded, firm and steady. Every word. His eyes softened even more. "You're more than I ever hoped for." Her breath broke into a quiet sob, but it was not sorrow that bent her. It was release, relief, wonder. Joy she had never allowed herself to feel. Her bouquet shook in her hands until, gently, he took it from her and passed it aside, freeing her arms. And then, before the crowd, before the priest, before all the watching eyes, he pulled her close. It was not a hurried embrace, not a performance. It was slow, deliberate, protective, as if he were gathering up every piece of her that had ever been broken and holding them together in his arms. She buried her face against his chest, her tears soaking into the fine fabric of his suit, but he did not mind. His arms tightened around her, strong and sure, anchoring her in a way she had never known. The world could watch. Let them. For the first time, she did not care what others saw, because in his arms she was not hidden, not veiled, not shamed. She was loved. The priest's voice, kind and warm now, carried across the hall. "Then let this union be sealed, not only with vows, but with love." The guests rose in anticipation, but he did not wait for ceremony. He leaned back just enough to look at her again, his hands cradling her face. His forehead rested against hers, their breaths mingling. "May?" he asked softly, giving her the choice. She nodded, a tiny motion, tears still clinging to her lashes. And then, With the gentleness of a man who understood the weight of what this meant, he kissed her. It was not a grand kiss, not the kind made for audiences. It was tender, unhurried, a promise written in warmth and breath. She felt her knees weaken, her hands trembling as they clutched the front of his jacket, but he held her steady, as if to say, "I will not let you fall." When he pulled back, Luke, just enough to look at her again, her tears had changed. They were no longer the tears of fear or shame that had stained her veil. They were tears of joy, shining like jewels in the light. The guests erupted in applause, but she hardly heard them. All she heard was his voice, low and steady, whispering against her ear. "No more shame," he said. "Not with me. Not ever." Her heart, fragile and battered though it was, finally let go. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe. And as the hall filled with celebration, as the music swelled and family cheered, the bride who once hid her face in shame stood unveiled, her tears turned to laughter, her heart unburdened. For she had been seen, she had been chosen, she had been loved. Not despite who she was, but because of it. And so their marriage began not with perfection, but with truth. Not with appearances, but with acceptance. Love unveiled.